reason I asked you because you exposed Black Lives Matter, and in one of your recent video, most people, especially white people, are afraid to deal with Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
And you exposed who was behind them and all that good stuff. Tell us a little bit about that. If you remember of it.
Yeah, I mean, they're a Marxist organization.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
There's a guy named Eric Mann who's part of the Weather Underground, right? Weather Underground was a terrorist group in like the 60s.
Yeah.
They opposed Vietnam, but they also basically just called white people pigs, and they were white, which is really funny. A bunch of white people, you know.
One of the guys who was good friends with Obama or something, right? When he first started out.
Yeah, Bill Ayers had some kind of an association with Obama. Bill Ayers was like the head of the Weather Underground. Yeah. But I don't know how well connected they ever were. They just both were like in Chicago.
Oh, okay.
I don't actually think that Obama had any kind of close connection with Weather Underground. That was just kind of one of those weird controversies that come out, you know, when somebody finds an association, they think, oh, maybe there's something there. I'm not sure that was really significant.
If I remember correctly, Sean Hannity from Fox, I think when Obama first started running, he exposed a lot of that.
Sean Hannity's great, man. He exposed a lot of good stuff.
Yeah.
But this actually is a real connection. So the head of Black Lives Matter is named Chris Kohls. I'm sure you've heard of her.
Oh, yeah.
And
I've had her on my show.
Oh, have you really?
She put her tail between her legs and ran.
Oh, yeah. I can imagine facing you. Yeah. People don't expect real arguments from the right.
Yeah.
Because there's two, everybody should know this, there's two conservative philosophies. There's the real conservative philosophy that we share based on Christian values. And then there is the straw man political philosophy of the right, which is what the left tells all of their, what like the left-wing media will tell their viewers. Yeah. This is what the right believes, you know, and it's just a complete fabrication. Everything's wrong. So if you grow up with this mentality that this is what the right believes, and somebody on the right gives you the real stuff, you're not prepared for that. That's why I think a lot of times you kind of throw people off their game. Every time I watch you, you're
amazing.
People. Yeah.
And so, who was this guy behind her? Behind Black Lives Matter?
So the guy's name is Eric Mann. He was part of the Weather Underground, and he has this very radical philosophy. In I think it was 26 or something, 1922, something like that. In the 1920s, there was a group from the USSR. They had this meeting called Comintern, Communist International. The idea was to spread communism throughout the world, not through war, but just through, convincing people, sending people into America to infiltrate in other places. Right. And what they figured out was in America, we don't have a class hierarchy that is stratified enough. So the best way, they thought a good way to get into America and to divide the country and create turmoil, because the Marxist philosophy is always revolution. You want the people to be so suffering that there's some kind of revolution that like destroys the country, and then out of that emerges a new Marxist state, right? Because that's what happened with Russia with the Bolshevik Revolution. Yeah. And so with America, they knew they couldn't do it with a class structure like they did in Russia. So they thought, well, what we can do is we can divide it by race, because there's some racial tension already, because obviously we come out of slavery. And
I totally agree, man.
So they were like, okay, let's piss off the black people, make them hate the white people, create a lot of tension, and then maybe there'll be like a race war. So they wanted to sort of devastate the country using a race war. And that has been the Marxist philosophy ever since that plan emerged. Then you have, obviously, the Germans that came over, infiltrated the universities, and the universities became very Marxist. And all of these different Marxist groups eventually fed off of each other and created what we now see as like Black Lives Matter and Antifa. Yeah. And this woman, Patrice Kohls, her mentor was this guy, Eric Mann, part of the Weather Underground. And their philosophy was, terrorism, create turmoil, burn stuff down. And now that is obviously the methods of Black Lives Matter. Yeah. And so she got all that from them. So this guy, this white guy, trained the woman who created Black Lives Matter. So it essentially comes out of that. It comes out of like a white tradition. Black Lives Matter is not really, doesn't really come from like a grassroots effort out of the black community.
Amazing. They admitted that they were Marxist. They were trained to do
she
that.
admitted that, right?
Yeah.
That's what kind of
They-
led me down this trail.
They literally admitted. I was surprised that they said it out loud.
It's changed. It used to be that this is all quiet.
Yeah.
But that's old school left.
Yeah.
New school left is shout it out loud, be proud of it. You know, be proud of all these crazy ideas, you know.
Why are so many people afraid of them?
I think it's because
Especially
it's a
white
new
people.
thing. I think it's a new thing.
Oh, I see.
I think for a long time, people didn't admit their intentions, right? Let me tell you what I think the biggest problem with the black community is in America.
Yes.
The biggest problem that black people have in America, the reason why you have, I think, that you have a lot of poor black Americans, right? What they say disproportionately poor, is that it's common in the black community to be racist against white people. And this is encouraged.
That's right. If you're not, you're getting in trouble with the black for not being racist.
And you get in trouble with white leftists. That's
Yeah.
the really crazy
I know,
thing.
sure
White
is.
leftists encourage black people in America.
Yeah.
I don't blame the black community. I don't blame all these black people that are racist against white people. They have been encouraged for decades to be racist
Yeah.
against white people. And this really hurts black people.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and so I try to talk about this on my show. I don't reach a lot of, you know, leftists on my show, but I would like to be able to. Because I think if we could fix that and things like that, then we could actually get along a lot better and be happy.
Absolutely.
But you know, people are definitely convinced that black people have a right to hate white people, that white people are guilty of all this stuff, even though, you know, you might not be racist, but other white people that looked like you 100 years ago were, so therefore you're bad also.
Amazing.
And people believe all this stuff, and so then we've been kind of conditioned that anytime anybody takes a position that's like pro-black people and anti-white people, that they're good somehow.
Yeah.
And that's not good. I think you should be pro-everybody.
That's right.
Be pro-good people,
Yeah.
and be anti-bad people. Don't be pro-black, pro-white, you know, whatever. That's silly.
What would it take to stop Black Lives Matter?
Oh, I think just education. I think they're stopping themselves, right? Because the more aggressive these groups become, the more people recognize this is not a good organization. And the more people know they're Marxist, the more people know they're radical. And this stuff all will eventually, because they're so, like you said, they're very proud of it. They talk about it. So people are going to figure out who they are, what their actual motivations and intentions are. They're seeing the results. You know, you can't see somebody like murder somebody in the street or burn down a building and think, you know, people do recognize it, and eventually people are waking up. I mean, you saw the NBA had like the worst ever, you know, ratings. Nobody's watching the NBA anymore.
They should not watch that while they're doing that. I had this woman callers on my show, and I asked her about capitalism, and she freaked out and ran.
It is weird that these people they don't recognize the historical, you know, what's happened historically with Marxism, that it's so devastating.
What do you think about all this stuff they're teaching white people and children about white privilege? White people are the scum of the earth.
White privilege.
You are
man.
racist simply because you're white.
Yeah, that's rough, man. That is a rough thing to teach people.
How do you deal with that?
You know, I don't know, because look, if you live a life where you're a white person, you're lower middle class or poor, like I grew up pretty poor. Like all my clothes were from
I thought you
Goodwill.
were white privilege.
Yeah, I thought so too. No, you know, my parents got everything. It's funny, I'll see these memes from Mexican culture, like from my Mexican friends. They'll put up like, you know, this was a hot dog bun, a hamburger bun, a this, a that, and it's just a piece of white bread, you know?
Right.
And I'm like, that was my family, you know, like, and I relate to this sort of like Mexican culture of these like jokes about being poor and stuff like that. I'm like, yeah, that was my life growing up. And I'll tell you what, like, I was privileged though. I consider myself privileged, but I consider myself privileged because I'm an American.
Yep.
Not because I'm white.
That's right.
If you look at like I think the poorest 20% of Americans actually use more goods and services than like the average European, which is you know, another first world region, another developed region of the world. And it's bizarre how rich we are. We have no gratitude for that. We have no real perspective because people just don't suffer enough.
That's right.
And there's no real way to inject that kind of experience into somebody's brain. Like if you grow up as privileged as we grow up here in America, even if we're not rich,
That's right.
people just don't recognize how much suffering they could be experiencing, and so they think, oh, this is a little bit unfair for this. And I always say this when people talk about how black people were oppressed historically in America. I agree that this has happened, of course. I mean, we all recognize that.
I don't.
Okay. I'll debate you on that. I'll debate you on that.
I don't recognize it.
But here's my balance.
I grew up on, as you know, I guess you know,
Yeah.
I grew up on a plantation under the Jim Crow laws. I remember for colors on and all that. I never thought of black people as being oppressed.
At that time, you felt like
no one
people
ever
were happy
said
and-
it. Black people were decent. They were getting married. No children out of wedlock. Very few. If a black woman got pregnant out of wedlock, she would go into hiding.
But they were poor.
I didn't think of it as poor.
But you see, you know,
And I grew up in a
that's
tin
really,
house.
That's an amazing perspective.
Outdoors toilet. Worked the cotton field. Have you ever worked the cotton field?
No, I've worked strawberries, and what were the other things? Strawberries and a couple other vegetables and
Well,
stuff.
I gotta take you to
Mainly
Alabama.
strawberries. Strawberries is tough. I don't like picking strawberries. We pick strawberries in
But
Oregon.
I didn't. The whole point is there was nothing about being poor
No.
or white people holding us back. No conversation like that at all.
You know what I call that? I call that dignified poor. Because and I see this in Eastern Europe. If you ever go to Eastern Europe, you'll see people, and like the towns, it's just all dirt roads,
Yeah.
you know, all like kind of crappy little houses and stuff.
Yeah.
But if you go into the house of like an old Bulgarian lady, for instance, right? Everything is meticulous.
Yeah.
She's got like an old rag that she's used
That's
for 10
right.
years, but it's perfectly folded, you know. She takes care of all of her stuff.
Yeah.
It's beautiful, right? She's like dignified. She's a very dignified person.
Yes.
She's got integrity, even though she doesn't have maybe a lot of
That
money.
is so true, man.
And I love that. I love to see somebody like that because I have so much more respect for them than I have for the kid that just plays PlayStation all day in his parents' basement and his place looks like hell.
know.
He grew up with everything and he
Yeah.
has no respect. And granted, we're
absolutely
not as
right.
clean as the women, but
Right.
you know.
So was I poor?
What's that?
Was I poor growing up?
I don't know.
Because I lived in that environment. A little tin roof house.
Well, financially
outdoors
maybe.
bathroom.
Financially maybe.
I never went hungry.
But you weren't
We-
poor in
we worked
spirit.
in
You weren't poor in
plantation.
your head.
Right.
And I think that there's a big difference there, you know, with people.
It
With-
is.
You know, if you're homeless, see, a lot of these homeless, they choose to be homeless. They don't want to work.
Right. You're right.
But they have access to a lot of resources.
Yeah.
They may have more access to resources than you do.
Too
I mean,
much.
look at it like this. If you have an iPhone or you have a smartphone, you have access to more entertainment than the kings of, 200 or 300 years ago.
That's right.
You are wealthier than almost anyone in history, even if you're like a homeless person with a cell phone.
Yeah.
It's bizarre.
It
It's a
is.
bizarre time we live in. We're so wealthy. We don't even.
But I never knew I was poor.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even, even when I look back on it, I don't think of it as being poor.
Yeah.
And poor compared to what? You know what I'm saying? My family bought land. My grandfather worked the plantation.
Yeah.
And I just never thought of it as being poor.
Yeah. Well, there's clearly no way to get yourself out of that situation. I mean, you're obviously still in terrible shape. You know.
That's right. Hungry.
Hungry.